Yeah, after you help me pick some of these high bush cranberries,
Okay.
then I'll tell you a YNDA story after we're done.
Yeah, after we're done, we pick a lot of berries.
Yeah. Do you know what we call these high bush cranberries in Indian? We
Yeah,
call
cause
we
the
call them tante gigi.
yeah, and they're for fish.
That means high bush cranberries.
Yeah, not old ones for fish.
Oh no.
They won't like that. They'll die. Cause now we gotta make some. Got it. Hey Daniel, there's a lot of them right over there. Right over
Yeah.
there. Get you.
Well, we're done picking berries. Are you ready to hear YNDA story now?
Not right now, but Mom, wait, Mom just found some more berries.
Well, now, Miss Mary, we gotta help clean the berries. Get all the leaves and stems and dirt off them.
Yeah.
So we kind of go like this and put water in it and slowly clean out all this stuff in here. Twigs and leaves and dirt.
That he will be very mad if you don't clean it.
Mm-hmm.
Dad, I got the people with yellow leaves. They're having spots.
Here, just stay there. Here, you want me to tell you a story about the magic house?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you about some of the characters in this story. One of the characters is Sagani Guy. You know that big black raven that you see flying around sometimes outside. And then there's Keishia. He's a lynx, you know, like a big cat that that walks around in the woods, in the forests. And then there's the grandma, the Chukde. She's like a little old grandma, Indian lady with white hair, you know, and got her dress on and got her moccasins and all kinds of stuff. Let's walk this way. Have a seat right there. Are you ready to hear a story about the magic house? And with Sagani Guy and Keishia and the Chukde and the whirlwind? Yeah? Well, long time ago I'll tell you another story about Sagani Guy. Well, he was laying in bed like normal, just as geet and ugly as ever, just laying around, snoring around in his bed. And he was so lazy he wouldn't even help his grandmother help her with any chores or anything. She couldn't even get him to pack water or get up and give him firewood or anything for the stove. And um, Keith, yeah, he decided to go for a walk, but Sagani Guy and Keith Ya were related since they had the same grandma. So Keith Ya one day went for a walk and he walked out in the forest. And it was a real nice day out. The sun was out and he was looking around and just enjoying and taking his time going for a little walk out in the woods. And then he realized that he started getting hungry, and he didn't pack any food with him or anything, not even no lunch or anything. So he just kind of kept on walking and walking, and he said to himself, "I wish there's somebody around here where I could get something to eat or have a cup of tea or something." And then as he kept on walking, all of a sudden he came upon this little house in the forest. And so he knocked on the door. "Hello, hello, anybody there?" And um, he walked in, and he seen this table with all this food and all kinds of food on it. And there's a chair, and he goes, "Oh, I wish I could have some of this and some of that. Ooh, that looks so good." And all of a sudden this plate came floating, and it had all this different kind of food he wished for on it. And somebody said, "Here, sit down, have some dinner." And so he sat down. He said, "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, Chin An." And so he started eating and eating. And then when finally he got full, and he says, "Oh, I better be going now. It's starting to get pretty late out, and I should probably go. And I thank you very much for the food and everything." And as he started walking out the door, they said, "Oh, come back anytime. We enjoyed your company and everything." And so he was so excited of what happened, and so he had to go home. He had to go and tell somebody. So he started running home to go so he could tell his grandma. And so he's running and running back home and running through the woods, and he finally got back to his grandma's house, and he goes, "Grandma, Grandma, guess what happened to me? Something so interesting happened to me today. It was so exciting." And so he told his grandma what happened, that he came upon this magic little house, and that the people there, the spirits were so nice and everything. And Sagani says, "What? What? What? Where's that house? Huh? Where's it? Where is it at? Where? Huh? Huh?" And getting up and wondering where all this food and this magic house was. "Huh? Where's it? Where'd it go? Huh? Huh?" And so he got up, and Sagani guy, his grandma said, "You just stay in bed. You'll just probably get in trouble, you ornery old bird." And so he, where's my moccasins? Where's my moccasins?" "Oh, they're over there. I just finished sewing them up," his grandma said. And so he puts on his stinky, rotten old moccasins, and gets his backpack and his walking stick, and he heads out the door, going to the magic house. And then he was walking. When he walking, then he finally found the magic house, and he goes, "Oh, there's the magic house." And he just opens the door, flings it open, just walks right in, and just starts packing up all the food and everything. And when he walked in, he heard these bunch of people laughing. "Ah, ha, 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 ah, look at that funny guy. Ah, ha, ha, ah, ha." And when he heard them voices, he just started getting real mad, and just started swinging his walking stick everywhere under the table. "Where are you guys laughing at me? What? Quit laughing. Where are you guys at?" And he got real frustrated, and he just, forget it. And he just started packing up his pack sack with all this food and everything. And so after he started packing up the food and everything, he walked out the door, didn't say thank you or anything, just started packing up the food, didn't even ask or anything. As the Sagani guy finished packing up all the food and everything that he had taken from the magic house, he walked out the door. He was flipping, his backpack was so heavy and full of food and everything that he could barely walk. He was just kind of started waddling down the trail. And he didn't even say thank you or anything for the food. He was so rude and mean. And so he started walking back home down the path, and he was so laid down with food and everything. He was just kind of waddling and barely walking, straining, using his walking stick. And as he walked around the bend, Keith Yaw and his grandma were sitting out by the fire, and they seen Sagani guy walking around the bend, and then behind him they seen the big old whirlwind going like all these mad spirits from the magic house were coming down looking like a whirlwind. And so the whirlwind caught up with Sunny Guy and just started beating him up and fluffing up his feathers when they were all matted down and gross looking, and just started beating him up and everything and food, and the food just kind of went floating back down the trail back to the magic house. And Sarani Guy comes stumbling in, all beat up and black and blue and just beat up from the whirlwind because he just took all that food and everything without asking. And he goes stumbling back over to his bed, and she says, "I knew you'd get in trouble, Sonny Guy," she said. Just started barking him out real bad. "I knew you'd get in trouble. You can't do nothing without getting in trouble." The moral of the story is that you should respect everybody's things. You shouldn't go into somebody's house and just start packing up everything you see, because that's considered as stealing. How we end our stories is with the phrase of, "May winter be short and summer be long." It's how we end our old stories when we tell YNDA stories. Wasn't that a nice story? Hey, let's go for a little walk. Mm-hmm. Woohoo! Oh, look, there's a creek. The creek, the creek. Over there.
Hi, I'm Patricia Wade, and I'm going to tell today a YNDA story. YNDA means ancient Indian legends that have been passed down from generation to generation. And this story today is about the Nodosi lady. Nodosi is aunt. This story happened a long time ago, way back when people could communicate with the animals. They could talk to each other, and sometimes they even married each other. So there was a nice young couple that lived out in the woods. It was a husband and his wife. His wife was the Nodosi lady, and they lived up the hill from a beautiful little lake. And they had a very nice life. The husband went out and did the fishing and hunting and brought back the food. And the wife did her wifely duties, keeping the house clean, washing clothes and scrubbing the house up, cooking meals, all that good stuff. They just had a really nice life until one day, suddenly, without any warning at all, the husband went completely blind, totally blind. He couldn't see anything, not anything. Everything was dark. So what did that mean? He couldn't go hunting because he couldn't see where the animals were to get them and bring them home. He couldn't go chop the wood because he couldn't see where the wood was. Maybe he would chop his leg. So all he could mainly do was just sit in the chair and wonder why this happened. Why did I go blind? And time went by and he just got sadder and sadder because all he could do was just sit around. And he even had to ask his wife, the Nodosi lady, to bring him food and things like that. And he would say, "Wife, I'm hungry. Would you bring me something to eat?" And after a while, the Nodosi lady she really got tired of having to bring him food and all that all the time. So she started getting mean. And so one day, she took a piece of meat after he had asked for something to eat. And she took a nice piece of meat and cut it into small pieces. And then she thought, oh, I'll keep all these good ones for myself. And then she took all the pieces that she didn't want to eat. They weren't fit for her to eat. Little pieces of gristle and fat and some moose hair on the edge. And she put it on a plate. And then she said, "Here," and handed it to her husband. And he took the plate and he would eat some meat, and he knew it didn't taste as good as he thought it used to taste, but well, he was hungry, so he had to eat it anyway. And then he'd say, "Wife, I'm thirsty. Could I have something to drink?" And she would just go, oh, so disgusted having to go get him something to drink. So she'd grab the cup and go outside, and it didn't matter if it was good water or not. She'd bring it in and say, "Here." He'd take the cup and take a drink, and he thought, didn't taste as good as water that he remembered, but what could he do? He was blind, he was thirsty, he had to drink a little bit of it anyway. Well, enough time went by and the poor husband was so sad. He just felt worthless. And by the way the Nodosi lady treated him, she made him feel even more worthless than ever. One day he decided to go down to the lake, and he said to the Nodosi lady, "Would you aim me into the direction of the lake?" And he took his walking stick and she pointed him to the lake, gave him a shove. He took his stick and he had to find his way down to the lake. He was down a little hill and he walked down the hill. He could tell when he got to the lake because his stick kind of hit the water and he could hear it a little bit. So he sat down by the side of the lake and he just started to cry. And he said, "Oh, why did this happen to me?" And then he heard a song. It was a song that the swan sings. And it goes, "Si di gia ho kheneret na qu'est-ce dessus. Si di gia ho kheneret na qu'est-ce dessus." And what it means is, I am the one who can help give you back your eyesight. Oh, that man got so excited. He said, "Oh, can you help me get my eyesight back? Oh, please, I really would appreciate your help." And so the swan came swimming over to the side of the lake where the man was sitting, and he said, "Okay, you can climb on my back. And you have to hold on tight. We're going to swim out to the middle of the lake. And you have to remember, keep your eyes closed. Don't open them until I tell you to. And if you open them, then it won't work." So the man got onto the swan's back and he held on really tight, and they swam out to the middle of the lake. And the swan said, "Now you really have to hold on tight, because we're going to dive to the bottom of the lake 3 times. And don't open your eyes." And so they went down, 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 down to the bottom of the lake. And they came back up, took a deep breath. Down they went again, down, 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 and up 3 times to the bottom of the lake. And the 3rd time they came back on top of the water. And the swan said, "Okay, now you can open your eyes." And that man opened his eyes, and he was so happy because he could see perfectly. He saw the beautiful water, and he saw the green trees. He saw the beautiful clouds in the sky, and the blue sky, and he was so happy and excited. He said, "Oh, thank you, Swan. Thank you so much." And he was so anxious to go home and tell his wife, the Nodosi lady, that he could see. And then he remembered, oh, she wasn't treating me very nice lately. Maybe I'll just pretend I'm still blind so I can see what she's been doing. So he went up the hill and he got in sight of the house, and then he took his stick and he pretended he was still blind. And he walked over to the house like a blind person would, went in and sat down on his chair. And he said, "Wife, I'm really thirsty. Could you get me something to drink?" And the wife went, she was so disgusted to have to wait on him again. She grabbed her cup and went outside and scooped up some water right out of a mud puddle. And she took it into him and she said, "Here." Well, he had his eyes almost closed, but he had them open a little bit and he could barely see through his eyelashes. And he looked into that cup and he saw worms in there, and he saw filth and dog hair and dirt. And he thought, this is what she's been giving me to drink. He could barely believe his eyes. He pretended he took a little drink, but of course he didn't drink any, and then he just secretly dumped that muddy water out. And a little later he said, "Wife, I'm really hungry. Could you bring me something to eat?" She just got so mad as usual and went over and took a piece of meat and cooked it, cut it up. And she took all the best pieces and threw all the scraps on a plate, and took the plate with all the old leftover scraps that you might feed your dog, and took them to her husband and said, "Here." He took that plate and he looked at that meat and he thought, that's what she's been feeding me. He got so mad. Oh, he really got mad, and he stood up out of his chair and he said, "I can see, and I know what you've been doing. You get out of here." And she got so scared. Oh, she started running for the door, but he was so mad. He grabbed his axe and he lifted it up and he chopped her butt right off. It was just hanging by a little thread, and she grabbed it and she was scurrying toward the door, dragging her butt behind her. And so that's why the ant today looks like it does, which is like it's almost divided into 2 different pieces with the holding together by a string because of that doggone Nodosi lady. So the moral of the story is, if you're around somebody that's really sick or doesn't feel very good, or maybe they're handicapped, don't be mean to them, and treat them very nice and help them all you can. You don't want to be like that Nodosi lady. And that's the end of the story of the Nodosi lady. Thank you. Bonte Yanenda Dang at Takanso Meskiti. Hmm. 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 My, who's at my door? Looks like there's a bunch of people out here.
Hi. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good today.
Can you tell us a story? Can you tell us a story today?
Sure, Yanida?
Mhm.
Yanida story. About the Basine?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, in the olden days when kids were told a story, they have to work for it.
Yes.
Like packing wood and water and any little thing they can do for their chukde.
Yeah. Pick rocks.
Even pick rocks
Yeah, pick rocks.
if they need to be picked. Go stack some wood.
Just little wood, not big wood.
Just little wood.
Okay.
Come on.
Ow!
You have to stack them right here so Uncle Gary can pick them up real easy to put in his truck. Thank you. Good kids.
Now we gotta stack them on top.
Good job.
I know, that was good, huh?
That was worth a Basine story. Once upon a time, there was a village.
Village, I didn't know
Yeah, and they had a teepee. This family lived in a teepee. The mama, the daddy, the grandpa, and the grandma, and the uncle, and aunts. They all lived in this teepee. And they usually have a fire right in the middle of the teepee floor. And one morning they had a little boy that was just a brat. He turned into a brat. He got so rotten. One day he got up and he just started crying and crying and crying. The mama tried to comfort him, offer him food. Everybody's trying to entertain him. He just wouldn't pay attention to nobody. And he cried, don't even listen to his grandpa or grandma or mama or daddy. And he cried all day. They worked and worked, tried to keep him from crying. Finally, night time came and the little boy was supposed to go to bed. And he said, "No, I don't want to go to bed." They begged him to go to bed, and he wouldn't do it. Everybody was worked all day, and they're tired. They need to go to bed and rest. So one by one, they went to bed. They said, "Come on, little boy, you better go to bed. We are all going to bed." And he just kept crying and scraping his eyes. And everybody went to sleep. He sat out around the fire crying. Pretty soon there was a Basine that was sitting out on a tree.
in his nest.
Yeah, he was in his nest, I guess. He said, doggone, I'm just so sick and tired of listening to that kid crying. I'm gonna go get him. He must have no mama. He's crying so much. And so he said, I'm gonna fix this thing. I'm gonna take that kid. I'll give him something to cry about. So he went and caught a little fish, about a little minnow, probably about that big. Yeah. And he got some sticky glue on it, just like,
Super glue.
yeah, super glue. And then he put it on a string, and he went flying over to the teepee. Sat on top of the teepee, and dangled this fish. He put it through the hole in the teepee where the smoke comes out, and dangle it in front of that kid. And that kid is selfish and greedy anyway, and he saw that fish hanging there, and he said, oh boy, tapakai.
Oh, boy, it's a cat.
Tapakai means little fish. He grabbed it, and his hand stuck to it, and Basine pulled him out through the teepee hole. And he went flying back to his nest. This kid stuck on this, like these helicopters when they rescue people. So he flew with him up to his nest on a tall, big, must have been cottonwood tree. And set him in his nest, and that's where he starts scratching his face. YNDA And the kid's face was all bloody with that Basine's thick claws. Pretty soon the mama woke up. She said, oh, my little boy went to bed all by himself. She looked over at his bed. He wasn't there. She said, oh no, where is he? She looked around, couldn't see him anyplace. Then she woke everybody up and said, hey, our little boy is gone. Everybody jumped up and started running around like crazy looking for him all over around the teepee, in the bushes. And then they heard this Basine singing out in the woods. Sing te bon te yananda. You can sing with it. Dang e tan su. Skidi. And then they said, oh no, Basine got our baby, and listen to him singing. He said, where did his mother go that he's crying so much? So they all jumped up, ran into the woods toward the sound of the Basine singing. And they found the tree, and they said, please, Basine, give us back our little boy. And Basine said, nope. I'm going to have his toes for breakfast, those fat little toes.
And little fingers. Fat little tootsies.
Yeah, those tootsies look very delicious. And they said, no, please don't do that. Give us back our little boy. He won't cry no more. He said, no, I'm tired of listening to this kid crying all the time. And they begged him. And the uncle said, if you don't give us back that little boy, I'm going to go knock you in the head. And he said, nope, I'm going to keep this kid. Look at his fat little fingers. That'd be good eating too. And so the uncle ran back to the teepee, and he went and put on his leather jacket, leather pants, leather moccasins, leather gloves, and a leather hood. Grabbed his hatchet, and away he went.
His gloves.
He got his gloves. And he ran back to the tree and said, Basine, I beg you one more time to give me back my little nephew, or I'm coming up to get you. The scene don't even pay attention. He's still singing his song. Te bon te yanında dang e tansu miskidi. So the uncle climbed that tree and he knocked that Basine in the head with his hatchet, and Basine went tumbling down. And then he picked his little nephew up, pack him back down off the tree, and give him back to his mama. And the little boy said, "I'll never cry like that again." They took him back to the teepee, and they didn't have medicine those days except what they can make. So they washed his face with urine, and it stung really bad. But that baby never cried. He learned his lesson well, even though it was stinging real bad. No more crying for the baby.
Hello, my name is Sandra Shagadoff Stewart, and I work with Chikaloon Village YNDA School. Today, I'm going to be telling you a YNDA story. Long time ago, they say that animals and people could communicate. And this is the story about Nagaitsa, when people don't listen. So be careful, or you could be a Nagaitsa. It begins with Keith Ya, who is Lynxman. Keith Ya loved to take long walks in the woods. He loved looking at all the trees and the scenery and the water and the flowers. And this day was just like any other day. He was out taking a long walk. And as he was out walking, he realized he had been gone a long time. And he was beginning to get very hungry. He was thinking, I didn't bring anything to eat. Boy, I sure wish I could meet up with somebody and maybe they have a cup of tea they can share with me. So he's thinking that as he's going along the trail. Pretty soon he begins to see some smoke coming up in the sky. And he goes, oh, maybe there's somebody there that may have a cup of tea. So he begins walking along the trail, and as he's coming up to the smoke, he begins to see a little creek or a body of water, and he sees a little man sitting there, Nagaitsa. He's fishing with his fishing pole, really paying attention to what he's doing, and Keith Ya thinks, oh, great, somebody's there. I'm going to go see if they have anything to share with me. And as he gets there, he introduces himself, And he talks about his journey, how long he's walked, and that he's becoming very hungry. Nagaitsa never say anything. He's just sitting there mumbling with his fishing pole about the fish that got away and how the fish are running today, but he never responds to Keithia. Keithia thought to himself, oh, I'm going to say it again. Maybe he didn't hear me. He says it again. Again, Nagaitsa never say anything to him. Keithia went, wonder what's wrong with him. So he begins looking around. And as he's looking around, he notices something up the trail. Maybe at the camp. And that trail goes up a hill, so he thought he'd go up the hill. Maybe there was somebody else up there. So he goes up the hill, and he notices there's a small camp, and it has fish cooking. 2 fish on sticks. And they're sitting there. And he's thinking, hello? Anybody here? And nobody responds, so you think, oh, that must be that little Nagaitsa's camp. I'll run down there and ask him if this is his fish. So he runs down the hill and he says, is that your fish cooking up there? I was wondering if maybe I could have a bite to eat. I've traveled so long. Nagaitsa never say anything. Never even look at him. Keithia thought, well, I guess I'll just go back up there and have a bite to eat. So he goes running up the hill. He sits down and he starts eating. And after he eats, he lays down right by the fire. Thinking, boy, that was good. Pretty soon, Nagaitsa comes walking up the hill. And he had a couple of fish with him. And he's walking up the hill. And as he's coming to the camp, he notices, wait a minute. I thought I was cooking some fish. And Keithia, sitting there laying by the fire, says, Chinnan, which means thank you. That fish was so good. Nagaitsa never say anything. He's standing there with his fish. Oh well, I'll just start cooking these fish. So he puts them on the stick and goes on along his business. Goes back down to fish. And Keithia, boy, never say nothing. So he goes, well, if he's not going to say anything, I'm just going to eat those fish right there that's cooking. So he cooks them up, and he eats them. And boy, that was good. Well, I wonder if he's got any food around. I'm still kind of hungry. And he looks around, and on the shelf there was a birch bark basket. And he takes it down, and he looks in it, and it had ginkas, which is cranberry sauce. And he, oh boy, he looks at it. He starts eating it. And boy, that Nagaitsa, what a good cook. And he eats it and eats it and eats it, and pretty soon it's all gone. And oh boy, that was so good. He puts the bowl down. After Keithia eats the ginkas, he decides to lay down beside the fire and relax. So he's laying there. Pretty soon, oh, my stomach, it hurts. I think I have to go to the bathroom. And he thinks, oh, I'm going to show that Nagaitsa for not talking to me. He grabs that birch bark basket and he cleats in it. That means he pooped in it. And he filled that basket all the way to the top. He put it back on the shelf. And about that time, Nagaitsa comes walking up the trail. But this time he didn't have any fish. And when he gets there, he thinks, I thought I was cooking some fish around here. I think I've got some ginkas around. I'll eat that. Puts his gear down and walks over to the shelf, grabs that birch bark basket, and he's thinking, oh, it's gonna be so good. Puts his finger in it. Oh, how come that tastes like wheat? Oh well. He puts it back on the shelf, and Keith was just laughing. He was just rolling around, holding his stomach. He thought it was the funniest thing. He couldn't stop laughing. He's rolling around. But Nagaitsa never said anything. He just shrugged his shoulders and went back to fishing. Keith was just, oh boy, that was so funny. He thought to himself, well, I guess I better go thank Nagaitsa for all his hospitality. Even though he didn't have any, he never respond or say anything to him. But I did eat all his fish and his ginkas, so I should go down and thank him. So Keith goes down the trail, and he says to Nagaitsa, Chinan, Chinan for the fish and the delicious ginkas. And Nagaitsa never say anything. He sits there and he's fishing, mumbling to himself. Keith, oh, I can't believe this. Why won't he answer me? It's so rude of him. Well, I'll show him. So he gets on a rock and he pees on his head. Nagaitsa, I wonder how come the rain is warm? And Keith just threw up his hands. I give up. I give up. So he just couldn't believe how rude he was being. Nagaitsa was being. He said, I give up. He walks down the trail and along his way. And they say that Nagaitsa comes back into people. So you be careful that you don't become a Nagaitsa. When somebody's speaking to you, you respond to them. You answer them. And that is the story of Nagaitsa.
Na tezon den sunal en den nil ken den ditlitsi negataren nil natsnel you achana nil tsetsida le sunak nel den skiani det ni sit qasuntei ngani na seria suilat den Udira sunalanden nilkanden ditlitsi negataren. Hi, I'm Patricia Wade. I'm secretary on the Chickaloon Village Traditional Council, and I'm also editor of the Chickaloon News. Once upon a time, there was a young man named Hutnaphusen, and he fell in love with the chief's daughter and wanted to marry her. Well, that wasn't an easy thing to do because not just anybody can marry the chief's daughter. It had to be someone very special, someone who could provide very well for the chief's daughter. So he had to prove what a good provider he was, and he worked long and hard to show that he could do the job. So finally the chief said, okay, you can marry my daughter, Hutnaphusen. So they got married, and he was a good husband. He did all the right things. They even had a little boy. One summer, Hutnaphusen said to his wife, let's go up into the mountains, and I can do some hunting there. So they took their little boy and they went up into the hills, and they set up a nice little camp and built a nice little meat rack, and Hutnaphusen went out hunting. He was a very, very good hunter. Every day he brought back some meat, some goat, caribou, sheep, and his wife had to work very hard because back in those days they didn't have refrigerators or freezers to keep the meat nice. They had to smoke it and make jerky so that they could preserve it. So she had to go gather wood, and her little boy and her, and keep the fire going and cut the meat in nice little strips, hang it up to dry, and keep all the flies away from it. They worked very hard. And Hutnaphusen was a very good hunter. Every day he was bringing meat home until he had so much meat that he started feeling really proud of himself. And he started thinking, boy, I'm really good. I'm such a great hunter. And the more he thought about it, the greedier he got. And we don't know who he was going to show all this meat off to, but probably the rest of the villagers. One day he got so greedy that he told his wife and his son, he said, you don't eat any of this meat. That was a very, very cruel order. Then away he went to do more hunting. Well, after a couple of days, the little boy was so hungry he could hardly stand it. And he told his mother, please, Mom, I just want a little piece of meat. And she said, no, you heard what your dad said. I can't give you any meat. He said, oh, I'm so hungry. Please, I want some. And she just felt so bad. He finally said, well, how about if you just give me a little piece, just a little piece of fat then? And, oh, she couldn't take it anymore, so she went to the meat rack and she found a piece of meat with some fat on it, and she took her knife and cut a little piece of fat and gave it to her little son. And he was so hungry, he just gulped it right down, and then he felt satisfied. He was okay. Well, that night, Hutnaphusen came home bringing more meat, and he looked at his meat stash and he started counting it and checking it over. And then he came across that one piece that had a part missing. And he said, who cut this meat? As if he didn't know the only people there was him and his wife and son. And his wife said, well, your son was so hungry and I just gave him a little piece of fat. And the Hutnaphusen was mad. He said, I told you not to eat that meat. I want you to go in the woods and you get me a stick, and I want it shaped like this. And he told her how he wanted that stick shaped. So his wife felt so awful. And she went walking into the woods and she started crying, and she knew she had to get that stick, so she found one like he wanted. And she brought it back. She didn't know just what the heck he needed it for. So she handed it to Hutnaphusen. He looked at it, and he grabbed his son, and he pulled his mouth open, and he stuck that stick down his throat into his stomach and hooked the piece of fat and pulled it out. Well, we don't know what he did with that piece of fat, but he was so greedy he probably ate it himself. And his wife, she'd had it. She said, "You just wait, Hootnothusen." So the next morning, he got up, Hootnothusen, going hunting again. And he was still kind of mad about that piece of fat, so he gave his family a big lecture, and don't you eat any more meat. And away he went to do some more hunting. As soon as he got out of sight, his wife started gathering up all kinds of dry twigs and wood, and she built herself a fire. And she built a big, nice big bonfire. And she went over to the meat rack, and she went through and she took all the best pieces of meat and she put them in a backpack until she could barely lift it. The rest of the meat she threw into the bonfire and burnt it up to ashes. Well, the Creator was not very happy with these people. First, because Hootnothusen was taking all the credit as if he provided the meat instead of Creator providing it for him, being so greedy. And then at the wife for wasting all that meat, because that's not the way we're supposed to treat that meat that's given to us. Not very respectful. So the wife and the son took that big pack full of meat and they walked down the trail back to her village. When they got home, she told her father what Hootnothusen did, and he was furious. He couldn't believe that he would treat his daughter and grandson that way. So later on in the day, Hootnothusen came back home from his hunt, but for the first day, he didn't get any meat. And he came back to his campsite, and there was nothing. No family, no meat rack, no meat. Nothing. Oh, man, he was mad as a hornet storming around there, and he thought, well, I'll just go get some more meat tomorrow. I'll show them. So the next day, Hootnothusen went hunting, and guess what? He didn't find anything. No animals, no meat. Day after day, he went out hunting, and there was nothing. Until Hootnothusen was weak with hunger. He was skinny like a skeleton, and he could barely get around. He knew that he was getting ready to die. That's how hungry he was. So he thought, oh, maybe I'll go back to the village. Maybe they'll forgive me. And he couldn't even walk by himself by then, so he got a little walking stick and he just staggered on down the trail. And on the outskirts of the village was a place where they used to cut their wood. They had a sawhorse with a log on it. Well, Hootnothusen made it that far, and he sat down on the log, and he was sitting there all hunched over, so hungry. And here comes a little fat kid running by, and Hootnothusen recognized him as his son. And he said, "Arnie, come here, my son." And the kid looked at him and said, "You're not my dad. My dad doesn't look like that." And he said, "Tell your mother I'm here." So the little kid went running back, and he told his mother and grandfather, "There's some ugly, funny-looking old man sitting out by the woodpile. He said he's my dad." And his mother and grandfather figured he was probably just missing his dad and wishing he would come back, so they didn't pay any attention to him. So the little boy ran back outside. He was playing. He went over to the man again, and that Hootnothusen said, "Come here. Here, give this ring to your mother." Because it's his wedding ring. So the little boy took the ring and he ran back to the house and he said, "Here, that man gave me this and said to give it to you." And his grandfather looked at the ring and he said, "That's Hootnothusen." He couldn't believe that he had the nerve to come back to the village. So he called all of his young braves and he said, "You go out there to that log that Hootnothusen is sitting on, and you carry that log with him on it over to the dump where all the dogs poop and pee, because that's the most filthy, dirty place you could think of." So the young men went over, picked up the log with Grootnathroesen on it, packed it over, and threw it into the dump with the dog excrement, and that's where Grootnathroesen died. Well, the moral of this story, of course, is not to be greedy, but also not to just focus on only one thing. Some people have Grootnathroesen syndrome for alcohol, or money, or for being mean, maybe television or reading. But it's better to just have little bits and pieces of this and that and the other, and that have a more balance in your life. And that is the story of Grootnathroesen. The end.